Chapter 1. Cast Out into the Void. The Discarded Heiress. The escape pod drifted in the Andromedan Rift, an expanse of space known for its eerie beauty and isolation. Its swirling nebulae painted the void in shimmering green and purple hues, casting an almost serene glow over the lifeless pod. Inside, Lyra Arcelia sat huddled, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. Her bioluminescent skin dimmed to a faint, pulsing glow, a reflection of her despair. Her family, one of the most powerful in the Zinthari Empire, had discarded her like refuse. The words of her father still rang in her ears. "You are weak, Lyra. You disgrace our bloodline. Weakness has no place in the Arcelia lineage." His cold, emotionless tone had cut deeper than any blade. He hadn't even looked at her as he gave the order to eject her from the family's flagship. To them, she wasn't just a disappointment, she was an obstacle to be erased. The pod's console blinked with red warning lights. Lyra's delicate fingers trembled as she brushed against the cracked surface. The life support systems were failing. Oxygen reserves had dipped below critical levels, and the power core was barely holding a charge. The tiny cabin was silent, save for the faint hum of failing machinery. Lyra whispered into the stillness, her voice hoarse and barely audible. "Why wasn't I enough? Why couldn't they just love me for who I am?" Her people, the Zinthari, valued strength above all else. Their empire was built on conquest and survival in the harshest corners of the galaxy. Lyra, with her gentle demeanor and inability to match her siblings' ruthlessness, had been an outlier since birth. She had spent her entire life trying to earn their approval, but nothing she did was ever enough. Now, she was here alone in the unforgiving void. A signal of hope. Hours passed as Lyra drifted in and out of consciousness. Her body, weakened from the lack of oxygen, fought to stay awake. The swirling nebula outside blurred into streaks of color as her vision dimmed. She reached out toward the console, her fingers fumbling to activate the distress beacon. A faint beep confirmed the signal was transmitting, though she doubted anyone would answer. "Someone, please," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "Don't let me die out here." Her consciousness faded as the oxygen levels dipped further, and the last thing she saw was the soft glow of the nebula surrounding her. The human rescuer. Far from the Andromedan Rift, Ethan Cole, a lone salvager, piloted his modest ship, the Stalwart, through an asteroid field. The ship wasn't much to look at, a patchwork of repaired hulls and second-hand engines, but it was reliable. Ethan wasn't a hero or an adventurer. He was a man trying to scrape together a living in a galaxy that didn't care about him. "Vera, anything interesting on the scanners?" Ethan asked, leaning back in the pilot's chair. His AI assistant, Vera, had been his only consistent companion over the years. "Negative," Vera replied in her calm, synthesized tone. "However, I am detecting a faint distress signal originating from the Andromedan Rift." Ethan sat up, his curiosity piqued. "The Rift? That's way off the usual trade routes. What's the signal saying?" "Standard distress code," Vera reported. "Life support failure. Signal strength indicates a small craft, likely an escape pod." Ethan frowned, rubbing his chin. The Rift wasn't a place people went willingly. If someone was out there in an escape pod, they were either extremely unlucky or running from something far worse. "All right, plot a course," Ethan said, standing and heading toward the ship's control console. "Let's check it out." Adjusting trajectory, Vera confirmed. "Caution is advised. The Andromedan Rift is notorious for hostile activity." Ethan strapped himself into the pilot's seat as the Stalwart surged forward, its engines roaring. He wasn't the type to ignore a distress call, even if it meant heading into dangerous territory. Life out in the void was hard enough without abandoning someone in need. The rescue. It took several hours to reach the source of the signal. The Stalwart exited hyperspace on the edge of the rift, its hull shimmering against the backdrop of the nebula. Ethan squinted at the display, his HUD pinpointing the escape pod drifting amidst the swirling colors. "There it is," he muttered, adjusting the ship's course. "Vera, give me a readout." "Escape pod detected," Vera confirmed. "Minimal power. Life support systems critically low. One life form aboard, vital signs weak but stable." Ethan's heart clenched. Whoever was in that pod didn't have much time. He activated the ship's tractor beam, locking onto the pod and pulling it into the stalwart's cargo hold. As the pod settled with a heavy thud, Ethan grabbed his emergency medkit and rushed to the hold. The sight that greeted him made him pause. The pod's canopy was cracked, its interior frost-covered from failing environmental controls. Inside was a figure slumped against the seat, her body faintly glowing. Ethan's brow furrowed as he realized she wasn't human. Her features were delicate, her skin a shimmering shade of silver blue that seemed to ripple with light. "Vera, what am I looking at here?" he asked, prying the canopy open. "Life form identified. Xanthari," Vera replied. "A highly advanced species known for their militaristic culture. The presence of an escape pod suggests she may have been exiled." Ethan carefully lifted the alien woman out of the pod, noting how light she was. Her breathing was shallow, her face pale. "Hang in there," he said softly, carrying her to the ship's medical bay. Reviving the stranger, Ethan worked quickly, connecting the alien woman to an oxygen supply and scanning her vitals. The stalwart's medbay was small but functional, equipped with basic tools and an autosurgeon that could handle most emergencies. "Vera, how's she doing?" Ethan asked as he adjusted the oxygen flow. "Her vitals are stabilizing," Vera replied. "However, she requires hydration and nutrients to recover fully. I recommend monitoring her closely." Ethan sat back, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He watched as the alien woman's breathing grew steadier, her glowing skin regaining some of its vibrancy. Despite her alien features, there was something unmistakably vulnerable about her, something that made him feel protective. "Who are you?" he murmured, brushing a strand of her silvery hair away from her face. As if in response, her eyes fluttered open. They were a vivid violet, glowing faintly in the dim light. She stared at him, her expression a mix of confusion and fear. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You're safe," Ethan said gently. "I found you drifting in the rift. My name's Ethan. What's yours?" She hesitated, her eyes filling with tears. "Lyra," she whispered. "My name is Lyra." Ethan offered her a reassuring smile. "Well, Lyra, you're not alone anymore. I'll keep you safe." For the first time in days, Lyra felt a flicker of hope. This human, this stranger had saved her when no one else had cared. Maybe, just maybe, her story wasn't over yet. Chapter 2. A New Hope. The Weight of the Past. The stalwart hummed softly as it cruised through the stars, a safe haven amidst the cold void. In the medical bay, Lyra lay propped against a makeshift cot, her glowing violet eyes wide with both exhaustion and wonder. Ethan sat nearby, adjusting the ship's course on a small console. The tension in the room was palpable, the silence broken only by the faint hum of the ship's systems. Lyra's voice was soft, almost a whisper. "Why? Why did you save me?" Ethan glanced up from his console, meeting her gaze. "Because you needed help. And out here, people don't survive alone." Her luminous skin dimmed slightly, her head bowing. "Most wouldn't bother. Especially for someone like me." Ethan set the console aside and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Someone like you? What does that mean?" Lyra hesitated, her hands clasping tightly in her lap. "I'm Xanthari. My people. We're not known for kindness or mercy. To the galaxy, we're conquerors, warriors. And to my family, I was a failure." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Failure? How?" She looked away, her voice trembling. "I wasn't strong enough. I didn't fit their image of perfection. My father. He said I was a disgrace. So, they threw me away." Ethan's jaw tightened. He wasn't an emotional man by nature, but hearing her story ignited a spark of anger within him. "They just abandoned you? Left you to die?" Lyra nodded, her tears glistening like liquid starlight. "It's the Xanthari way. Weakness is unforgivable." Ethan stood abruptly, pacing the small room. "That's not weakness. That's cruelty. You deserve better than that." His words hung in the air, and for the first time, Lyra felt a glimmer of hope. She didn't know this human, but his compassion was unlike anything she'd experienced. She clung to his kindness like a lifeline. Adjusting to life on the stalwart. Over the next few days, Lyra began to recover, her strength slowly returning. Ethan gave her space, but he also kept a watchful eye, offering food, water, and the occasional sarcastic comment to lighten the mood. Lyra, unfamiliar with human culture, found his easygoing demeanor both confusing and comforting. One evening, she wandered into the ship's small cockpit, drawn by the soft hum of machinery. Ethan was there, his feet propped up on the console as he sipped from a steaming mug. He looked up and gave her a lopsided grin. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. Lyra shook her head, her glowing hair shimmering in the dim light. "I'm not used to all of this. The quiet, the kindness." Ethan gestured to the seat beside him. "Come on, take a load off. You're safe here." She hesitated before sitting down, her gaze drifting to the vast expanse of stars outside the viewport. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "The stars. They seem freer than I've ever been." Ethan chuckled. "Out here, freedom's all we've got. It's not much, but it's enough." Lyra turned to him, her eyes filled with curiosity. "You don't fear the void? The isolation?" "Nah," Ethan said, taking another sip from his mug. "The void's honest. It doesn't pretend to be anything it's not. People, though, they're the ones you've got to watch out for." His words struck a chord in Lyra. She thought of her family, their cold indifference, and the society that had judged her unworthy. Yet here was a human, a stranger who had risked his life to save her without expecting anything in return. "Thank you," she said softly. "For everything." Ethan shrugged, but his eyes were warm. "You don't have to thank me. Just focus on getting better." An unseen threat. As Lyra settled into life aboard the Stalwart, a shadow loomed on the horizon. Unknown to her, the Zenthri family had not entirely forgotten their discarded daughter. A tracking beacon embedded in her escape pod had sent out a signal the moment it was activated. The Arcelia family wasn't concerned for her safety, they were worried about what she might reveal. On board the Zenthri warship Ecliptica, Lyra's older brother, Kalen Arcelia, stood before a glowing console. His sharp, angular features were twisted in disdain as he reviewed the tracking data. "She's alive," he said, his tone cold. "I knew Father's decision was a mistake. Weak or not, she's still an Arcelia. If she falls into the wrong hands..." A Zenthri officer saluted sharply. "Your orders, Commander?" Kalen's violet eyes narrowed. "Track her. Destroy anyone who gets in our way." A bond forged. Back on the Stalwart, Lyra began to open up about her past. She told Ethan about her childhood, the pressure to conform, and the day her father finally gave up on her. Ethan listened intently, his quiet presence reassuring. "You know," he said one evening, "strength isn't about how tough you are. It's about surviving, even when the odds are against you." Lyra tilted her head, her glowing eyes meeting his. "You think I'm strong?" "I know you are," Ethan replied. "You've been through hell, and you're still here. That counts for something." Her cheeks flushed faintly, and for the first time in years, she felt a sense of worth. But their newfound peace was shattered when Vera's voice rang out over the comms. "Ethan, incoming vessel detected. Zenthri warship class, heavy cruiser." Ethan's stomach dropped. "They found us." Lyra's face paled. "It's my family." Ethan shot her a determined look. "Well, they're not taking you back. Not without a fight." Chapter 3. The Clash with Her Family. The Shadow of the Past. The Stalwart jolted as its sensors blared an alert. The Zenthri warship Ecliptica emerged from hyperspace, its sleek, predatory frame looming like a specter of death. Lyra stood frozen in the cockpit, her glowing skin dimming in fear. Ethan remained calm, gripping the controls. "Vera, give me a readout." Zenthri warship, heavy cruiser class, armed with plasma turrets and long-range missiles. "They've locked onto us," Vera replied. "Recommend immediate evasive action." Ethan glanced at Lyra, whose violet eyes shimmered with panic. "I take it you know them?" "It's my brother," she said, her voice trembling. "Kalen. He's the most ruthless of my family. If he's here, it's not to rescue me." Ethan clenched his jaw, flipping switches on the console. "Then let's make sure he doesn't catch us. Hang on." The Stalwart roared to life, its engines blazing as Ethan sent it diving into a nearby asteroid field. Plasma bolts fired from the Ecliptica, streaking past them and lighting up the void. The ship's small size and agility allowed it to weave through the debris, but the cruiser was relentless, its powerful sensors tracking their every move. A deadly pursuit. Inside the Ecliptica, Kalen watched the chase with cold determination. "Keep firing," he ordered, his voice like steel. "I want that ship disabled, not destroyed. My sister comes back alive. The human doesn't." The crew obeyed, unleashing a barrage of plasma rounds that sent asteroids shattering into dust. Kalen's sharp eyes narrowed as the stalwart darted through the chaos, evading each attack with surprising skill. "Impressive," he muttered. "The human's more resourceful than I expected." Back on the stalwart, Ethan gritted his teeth as he maneuvered through the field. The ship shook violently as a near miss sent a shockwave rippling through the hull. "Vera, status report," he shouted. "Shields at 60%, Vera replied. "Their weapons are too powerful for prolonged engagement." Lyra clutched the back of Ethan's seat, her fear giving way to determination. "You can't fight them head-on. Kalen is relentless. He won't stop until he has me." Ethan glanced at her. "Then we outsmart him." "Aegis, any ideas?" Vera interrupted before Lyra could respond. "There's a dense nebula 2 clicks ahead. Its radiation will interfere with their sensors." Ethan nodded. "Perfect. Let's lose them in there." The nebula escaped. The stalwart dove into the glowing nebula, its swirling green and blue mists obscuring the stars. The radiation scrambled the ship's sensors, forcing Ethan to rely on manual navigation. "Visibility's crap," Ethan muttered, his hands steady on the controls. "Vera, keep us steady. The nebula's interference is affecting our systems," Vera warned. "Proceed with caution." The Ecliptica hesitated at the nebula's edge. Kalen stood at the command console, his jaw tightening. "They're trying to hide," he said. "Deploy the drones. Flush them out." Dozens of small, spider-like drones launched from the Ecliptica, their sleek frames designed to navigate harsh environments. They fanned out, scanning the nebula for any trace of the stalwart. Inside the small ship, Ethan cursed as his sensors picked up the incoming drones. "They've got hunters. We need a plan." Lyra stepped forward, her glowing skin brightening slightly. "I can help." Ethan frowned. "How?" "I know their tech," she said. "I can overload their drone signals. But I'll need access to your comm system." Ethan hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Do it." Lyra connected to the stalwart's comm system, her fingers moving with practiced precision. Her bioluminescence pulsed as she worked, tapping into the Zenthari frequency. The drones swarmed closer, their scanners locking onto the stalwart. "Almost." "There," Lyra muttered, her eyes glowing brighter. With a final keystroke, the drones froze, their lights flickering before they exploded in bursts of energy. Ethan whistled, impressed. "Remind me to put you on payroll." Lyra managed a small smile. "We're not safe yet. Kalen won't give up that easily." A brother's wrath. As the Ecliptica received reports of the drone's destruction, Kalen's calm demeanor cracked. His fist slammed against the console, his eyes blazing with anger. "She's working with him," he growled. "Fine. If she wants to defy her family, she'll face the consequences." Kalen ordered the Ecliptica into the nebula, its powerful shields deflecting the radiation. The massive cruiser tore through the mists, its sensors scanning for any trace of the stalwart. Ethan and Lyra felt the tremor of the cruiser's engines as it drew closer. Vera's voice cut through the tension. "Enemy vessel closing in. They've locked onto us." Ethan's grip tightened on the controls. "We can't outrun them in here." Lyra's expression hardened. "Then we fight." Ethan glanced at her, surprised by the steel in her voice. "You sure about that?" She nodded. "I won't let them take me back. Not after everything they've done." The final confrontation. The stalwart emerged from the nebula into open space, the Ecliptica close behind. Plasma bolts streaked past as Ethan activated the ship's limited weapon systems, firing back with calculated precision. "Shields at 40%, Vera warned. "We can't take much more of this." Ethan's mind raced as he assessed their options. "Vera, are there any anomalies nearby? Something we can use?" "Scanning," Vera replied. After a moment, she said, "There's an unstable asteroid field ahead. The gravitational fluctuations are extreme. It's highly dangerous." Ethan grinned. "Dangerous for them too." "Lyra, hold on." The stalwart plunged into the asteroid field, its engines straining as it navigated the chaotic terrain. Massive rocks tumbled through space, colliding and breaking apart in explosive bursts. The Ecliptica followed, its larger frame struggling to maneuver. Kalen's voice echoed through the comm system. Lyra, this is your last chance. Surrender now, and I'll spare the human. Lyra's jaw tightened. She grabbed the comm control and responded, her voice steady. No, Kalen. I'm done being your pawn. I'm done with all of you. Kalen's laugh was cold. You've made your choice. As the Ecliptica prepared to fire its main cannon, Ethan spotted an opportunity. A massive asteroid drifted into the cruiser's path, its unstable core glowing faintly. Vera, target that asteroid, Ethan said. Let's see if we can make them regret following us. The stalwart fired a precise shot, striking the asteroid's core. The resulting explosion sent a shockwave through the field, slamming into the Ecliptica and throwing it off course. Sparks erupted across the cruiser's hull as it struggled to stabilize. They're retreating, Vera reported. We've won. A new beginning. As the Ecliptica disappeared into the void, Lyra collapsed into her seat, tears streaming down her face. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch gentle. You all right? He asked. She nodded, her voice shaky. For the first time. I think I am. Ethan smiled. Good. Because out here, you get to decide who you are. No more living in their shadow. Lyra looked out at the stars, her glowing eyes filled with hope. Thank you, Ethan. For everything. He shrugged, his grin widening. Hey, what are friends for? As the stalwart sailed into the vast expanse of space, Lyra felt something she hadn't known in years, freedom. With Ethan by her side, she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Chapter 4. A family divided, a future united. The aftermath of the battle. The stalwart drifted in the quiet void beyond the asteroid field, its hull scarred but intact. Ethan slumped in the pilot's chair, his breaths coming in heavy gasps. Across from him, Lyra sat silently, her glowing skin dimmed with exhaustion. Despite the victory, the encounter with her family had left a deep mark. Vera, Ethan muttered, breaking the silence. Status report? Shields are depleted, weapons offline, and the engine core is running at 60% capacity, Vera replied calmly. Structural integrity holds at 85%. Could have been worse, Ethan said, glancing at Lyra. How are you holding up? Lyra didn't respond immediately. Her violet eyes stared out at the stars, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling. He won't stop, you know. My brother. My family. They'll come after me again. Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Then we'll be ready. You're not alone in this, Lyra. Her gaze shifted to him, and for the first time since the battle, a faint smile touched her lips. Thank you, Ethan. For everything. He shrugged. Can't let my co-pilot give up, can I? An unexpected ally. As the stalwart limped through space, Vera detected an incoming transmission. Ethan, we're receiving a distress signal, she announced. Ethan frowned, adjusting the ship's controls. Distress signal? From where? Unclear, Vera replied. The signal is encrypted, but its origin matches Zenthari technology. Lyra sat up straight, her eyes widening. It could be a trap. Could be, Ethan agreed. But if it's not? He left the sentence unfinished, letting the weight of the decision hang in the air. Lyra hesitated before nodding. We should investigate. If there's even a chance it's someone who needs help. Ethan gave her a small smile. That's the spirit. The stalwart adjusted course, following the signal to a derelict Zenthari shuttle drifting in a quiet sector of space. As they approached, Ethan activated the tractor beam, pulling the shuttle into the cargo bay. Vera, scan for life signs, Ethan instructed. One life sign detected, Vera reported. Zenthari origin. Condition. Stable but weak. Ethan grabbed his medkit and headed for the cargo bay, with Lyra close behind. When the shuttle's hatch opened, a young Zenthari man stumbled out, his silver-blue skin pale and bruised. Lyra gasped. Zarin? The man looked up, his violet eyes filled with relief. Lyra, thank the stars. You're alive. The weight of betrayal. Zarin, Lyra's younger cousin, explained his presence as Ethan tended to his wounds. I couldn't stand by any more, he said, his voice shaky. When I heard what your father and Kalen did to you, I knew I couldn't stay silent. Lyra stared at him, her emotions a whirlwind. You knew? You didn't say anything? I didn't have a choice, Zarin said, his voice cracking. If I spoke out, they would have exiled me too. Or worse. Ethan folded his arms, watching the exchange. Why are you here now? Zarin looked at Lyra, his eyes pleading. Because they're planning something terrible. Your father. He's not just after you. He's after anyone who would stand in his way. Kalen has orders to hunt you down at all costs. Lyra's breath caught. Why? I'm no threat to them. You are, Zarin said. Because you're different. Because you survived. And because if people see you thriving out here, they'll question everything the family stands for. The final confrontation. The revelation weighed heavily on Lyra, but it also ignited a fire within her. She stood taller, her glowing skin brightening. Then we fight, she said firmly. If my family thinks they can silence me, they're wrong. Ethan smirked. That's the Lyra I know. Zarin hesitated. You don't understand. They're sending an armada. You can't win against them. Ethan placed a reassuring hand on Zarin's shoulder. We don't need to win a war. We just need to send a message. The stalwarts set course for a neutral system where Zinthari communications arrays were stationed. Lyra and Ethan devised a plan to broadcast a message exposing the Arcelia family's cruelty, using Zarin's testimony as proof. As they approached the array, Kalen's warship appeared, flanked by smaller Zinthari cruisers. The stalwart shuddered as it took fire, but Ethan pushed forward, weaving through the onslaught. Lyra, you ready? He shouted over the alarms. She nodded, her hands steady on the console. Let's do this. A message to the galaxy. With seconds to spare, Lyra connected to the array and began broadcasting. Her voice rang out clearly across Zinthari channels, her words carrying the weight of truth. My name is Lyra Arcelia, she began, and I was abandoned by my family, cast out for being different. But I survived. And I'm here to tell you that you don't have to live in fear. The Arcelia family thrives on control and cruelty, but they don't speak for all of us. We can be more than what they've made us. Her message spread like wildfire, reaching Zinthari colonies and allies across the galaxy. Kalen, watching from his warship, roared in fury as his forces hesitated, their loyalty wavering. Ethan grinned as the transmission ended. Looks like you've got their attention. A new beginning. The battle ended not with violence, but with dissent. Kalen's forces withdrew, unwilling to continue a fight against someone who had sparked a rebellion. The stalwart escaped into hyperspace, leaving the Zinthari armada in disarray. In the quiet aftermath, Lyra stood beside Ethan in the cockpit, her gaze fixed on the stars. Do you think they'll listen? She asked softly. Ethan shrugged. Maybe not all of them, but some will. And that's how it starts. Lyra smiled, her glowing skin brighter than it had been in days. Thank you, Ethan, for giving me a chance to fight for something. He smirked. Hey, someone's got to keep you out of trouble. As the stalwart ventured into uncharted space, Lyra felt a sense of purpose she'd never known before. She wasn't just a survivor, she was a symbol of change. And with Ethan by her side, she knew the future held endless possibilities.